How does longevity impact how you should behave and where you should be putting your money? Let me bring in my co-host, Tony Shore. Tony, have you seen this Netflix special called Blue Zones? Have you heard of this?
Oh, I've heard all about it. I mean, it's kind of a buzz right now, but I have not actually seen the Netflix special. I've read reviews of it, and I've read there's a lot of commentary. Doctors are speaking out. You know, that you search Blue Zone debunked. A lot of people will say, here's the reality. But even in those, they say Blue Zone's debunked. And you think, okay, they're going to really shoot this whole thing down. They don't necessarily. They do say that people in these areas are obviously living longer or have a better chance of longevity. However, they don't. There are some myths. People think, well, people in blue zones are immune to chronic disease. That's not true at all, according to what I've read. They still get cancer in those zones, but they do have more longevity in certain areas, especially I think there's the top 5 a lot of people talk about.
Yeah, and I'm not going to spoil it for people that haven't seen it, or go over the whole detail with people that have. What I want to do is summarize it, cover the they call the Power 9. But just for those that are still not sure what we're talking about, this is a research group. They came together and they looked at data and looked for the people that are living the longest in the world, and they found 5 different hotspots, and they call them blue zones for whatever reason. And you can go to the website. I'm putting it there for those that are watching on YouTube and read all about it. And basically they said, all right, there are people living to 100, centenarians. Where are they? And where are they? Where's their environment like? And what's their diet? What's their social network like? What do they do? And is there any commonalities between these different spots? And so they identified these 5, and here they are: Okinawa, Japan; Sardinia, Italy; Nicoya, Costa Rica; Icaria, Greece; and then Loma Linda, California. So all over the world.
Been there, done that, to Loma Linda. I've been there many times. Yeah. I used to live in California, and I visited Loma Linda a couple of times. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I'll live longer just from being there a couple of times.
Right. Well, that's so the thought is, all right, what is it, just moving there? Will you live longer? All right. I'm not feeling so great, California, and I'll be all better. That's not how it works. But what they did is they came up with 9, and they used evidence, right? So it's an interesting show on Netflix. I watched the whole thing, and I've done some reading on it, and I found it interesting, and I want to relate it to how it might impact financial planning for people, in a way. And so there's 9 common denominators that they found on these people. And so what I want to do is go through them and then kind of take on how financial planning might change as a result of these. Again, though, before I get into it, the key is, do you even want to live to 100? And I asked that tongue in cheek, but I asked this question to a lot of my clientele, when we're planning Social Security or planning income. Well, what's your health history? How long did your parents live? How long do you think you're going to live? And it's a weird question, but we've done shows on longevity before. Yep. Tomorrow's promised to no one. But if you knew the answer, how long you're going to live, retirement planning would be a whole lot easier. But people often say, I know what your answer is, but when I ask people, how long you want to put to 100, they often laugh and say, I hope not.
Yeah.
A lot of people say,
it's my reaction. That's my reaction.
Right? Who wants to live to 100?
Right.
So the whole premise of the show is, what are they doing to live to 100? And what I found by watching the show is we're not looking at people that live to 100 and are, wheelchair bound with dementia in a nursing home, right? That's a little different than say someone like your grandfather, who, I want to relate to him when I'm going through these 9. I want you to reflect on your grandfather and tell me, did he do these things?
Right. Because my
But
grandfather, just for context, for our listeners that don't remember from past shows, my grandfather lived to 101, and he was camping 2 months before he passed. So his total time spent in hospice or long-term care was 2 months, the last 2 months of his life. And he lived to 101. So if I could do that and live to 100,
yes.
Yeah, sign me up,
Sign me up,
please.
right?
Yeah,
If my quality of life is high, then yes. If I'm just going to be, in a nursing facility by myself, not knowing who anyone is, including myself,
then
that's
no good. Yeah,
right.
That's terrible.
So so the premise is, the idea is live to 100 in a positive way and with a good quality of life.
Right.
And so what are these people doing? And that was it was interesting. I'll say that. So the first one and they call these the Power 9. There's a lot to this, so I'm just going to go through the 9 key common denominators. The first one is move naturally. These aren't in any order, but move naturally. So what they saw, and you'll see a lot of these in like Okinawa, they didn't have furniture. So like we do in the US, there's no one sitting on a recliner. You're on the floor, getting up and down at 95, and just going through that motion. A lot of gardening, a lot of people doing stuff, walking to the groceries, walking to wherever, a lot of natural movement. They weren't lifting weights and exercising. They were just living in a natural way. And so this idea of the US that we go to the gym and lift weights and go on a treadmill, you don't have to do that in these blue zones because you're just walking naturally. So how does that relate to financial planning? When you're going to retire, and you're setting up your new retirement home, or you're moving somewhere, you want to maybe consider, how is this going to allow me to move naturally? Living in the suburbs where I have to take a car to just get to the grocery store, is that ideal? Should I have a garden? Should I get into activities that require me to move? Something to consider for sure. The question for you, Tony, and for the viewers, your grandfather lived to 101. Was he moving naturally?
Yes, he was. He lived on the farm, the same farm, his entire life, from literally the same farm, and was a farmer from birth to passing, practically. So, at any rate, he moved around a lot. He got up at 5 a.m. every morning and went out and did chores and did work, and then went up and down the stairs to the basement to do work down in the basement, out to the wood shop, then over to the machine shop, then out to the grain bins, then down to the horse barn, then out to the cattle or hog setup. And so there was a lot of movement, I will tell you that. And throughout his life, even when he was in his 90s, there was a lot of movement.
So he didn't have a treadmill or the free weights in his house?
He never went to a gym a day in his life, and never lifted a weight a day in his life ever, even as a teenager. He told us that.
And some might argue he lifted weights every day in his life.
Yeah. Throwing bales of hay up into the loft. Are you kidding me? Yeah.
So even in his old age, say 98, was he still moving naturally?
Yep. Not, he slowed down in his late 90s. When he after, I'd say 96, he started to slow down a little as far as movement, but he still moved. It just wasn't, he didn't do as strenuous of work, but he got up every morning and went out on the farm and worked on tractors, and you'd see him tooling around out there, So
should I be guiding my clients to move to a farm, to retire on a farm? No, but you see what I mean? There was a lot of gardening. There's a lot of, so when you think about these things, like where are you going to put your money? Maybe you put it into a situation where maybe having stairs isn't the end of the world in Florida. Although 2-story buildings in Florida are tough to come by, but
yeah.
Second one, purpose. So why do we get up in the morning? This was a big thing that they talked about. Each culture had its own word for it, but the bottom line is, like, what am I getting up for?
This is a big one. I think this is the biggest.
Right. I think you would, now your grandfather was married and his first wife predeceased him.
His first two wives predeceased him.
First two wives. Okay. So the question was at that point, and this, I'll hear this a lot from my clientele and family I've seen, when a spouse is lost, the statistics are typically that the surviving spouse is going to die pretty soon thereafter.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is because that was their purpose, is each other. Did you feel that your grandfather had a purpose?
Yes, he definitely did. And I mean, and this is kind of funny. I mean, we kind of alluded to this kind of quirk of my grandfather's. There were very little time where he didn't have a spouse, though. My grandma Vivian passed away, and that was probably the longest period. That was probably a year. But he would, they had been together for a long time. They were married for eons, right? And he was in his older age when she passed, but he went out and found, he went out and found a local widow who, he's friends with all the farmers around. And there were a lot of women whose spouses had passed away. And there was one that was really close there, that they were really close with he and my grandma, and her husband had passed away like a few years before. And he went over and started to say, hey, come over and cook dinner, have dinner with me. And then they ended up getting married. So, and then that happened again because she got dementia and then was in hospice and then passed away. And so then he kind of went out and found another local widow because they were alone and he was alone, and it was kind of a mutual thing, but he never stopped getting up and going out and working. That's how he dealt with stuff. Yes. So he stayed active. He had a purpose even through that. And I think that is somewhat unique in his situation. Obviously there's many unique things about my grandfather's situation,
but so the purpose was getting on the farm, doing the work, which technically didn't have to be done, right?
Right. Like, no, he didn't have to. He wasn't actively farming even at that point because he had rented out the land. Mm-hmm. And so another farmer was actually farming the land, but he was still maintaining the farm and going out, and he was building things. He did a lot of woodwork. Yeah.
And he had that purpose.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get to the marriage thing later because there's another one about that, but he had a purpose. And I think what happens is traditional retirement is I'm done. And I see a lot of this with my clientele. They retire, maybe a couple retires, and one of them goes back to work. And it's not because of the money.
Right.
It's not because of the money, because we've planned. We have enough money. In fact, usually it's not. The money's like third on the list of reasons to go back to work. It's, I miss my coworkers, or what am I doing with myself all day?
I'm bored. I can only golf so much or read so many books.
Right. So we did a show on finding purpose. There's 5 stages, I believe it was, the stages of retirement. Good. Watch that show if you're struggling to come up with your purpose, because totally natural. But having one is definitely something that all these centenarians had. They had a purpose. Mm-hmm. Okay. Third common denominator was downshifting. They reduced their stress. So they didn't not have stress. They just handled it better. As you get older, they still had a purpose. They still were moving about. So they still had to interact and they still had stress, but they were able to reduce it. So you'd never, in this study or the analysis, they didn't find highly stressed out centenarians, and this seems natural, but one of and the phrase that I always use, successful retirement, is about increasing income and decreasing stress.
Yeah, stress is a killer. That's what you always hear, and it's true. Yeah,
we know this. And so when you're planning your financials, the big thing that I find is people are stressed out at work, and then they retire. They're stressed out about not having the money, and what they're really stressed out is about the unknowns, because there's a lot of unknowns in retirement, but you can plan for those. So by eliminating some of these financial unknowns, that takes the stress away, at least that portion of the stress. I don't want my clients to be stressed about finances. I don't want my clients to not retire because they don't have health insurance. I'm stressed out. I don't know what to do about health insurance. Well, we can solve that and eliminate the stress. So I think anyone that is highly stressed or anxious, the odds of them going to 100 is probably a lot lower than the same person that may not be as healthy physically, but doesn't have the stress.
Right.
Was your grandfather stressed at all?
Nope. He had very low stress.
He was camping in an RV, right?
If he had stressed, he would go camping or travel to a national park, or, he went out to, Yosemite and places like that. He loved it.
And I don't think your grandfather was a wealthy man.
Nope. I mean, no. And he didn't spend money. He did not spend money.
So it's not like, oh, he had all this money, he can be stress-free. He didn't have a lot of money, but he was still stress-free.
Yeah. I mean, he had a lot in land ownership, but he wasn't even utilizing that he wasn't monetizing that very much. He got his rent and he got his Social Security, and that's it.
Their real estate is their biggest asset, yet they're not. It's not like you getting money from it.
It's not liquid, and they aren't using the equity. I mean, unless they're actively farming and buying new farm equipment each year or building new buildings, he didn't use his equity either. So he owned all that land outright, and
So far, your grandfather was 3 for 3 in these blue zone.
He is 3 for 3.
All right. Number 4, and I'm not going to get too detailed into this. This is the 80-20 rule, not the bond to stock portfolio. It's
not the 60-40 rule.
60-40 rule. Eat until you're 80% full. They don't overeat. So they started, and then they stopped.
Yeah, that's my problem. I eat until I'm 120% full. Is that's not, those aren't the right stats I'm looking for, I guess.
Right. And did you, and also number 5 was plant slant, eat more vegetables and less meat, so some protein from meat. But what was your grandfather's eating habits like? Was he a vegetarian or?
Nope, but he ate 3 squares a day, basically, or two big meals a day, usually 3, a smaller lunch. But he really, there were always vegetables, always, and he always ate some protein and meat. He was a meat and 3 kind of guy, but the 3 were veggies usually. But when you say eating healthy, he ate a slab of butter on every piece of toast or bite of potato. He'd take a slab of butter, and they'd tell you never to do that, but he did. He ate bacon and eggs every morning. But then he got up and worked it off. That's the thing. I want to interject though here, Dan. I have not watched it, but you told me we're doing a show on the Blue Zone, living to 100, the secrets of longevity in these 5 areas. All the critiques of that study I've seen, and all the reviews by doctors, there's some really good ones, say the number one thing in common and the number one source is increase in America that we don't do is increasing our intake of colorful fruits and vegetables and some protein. But the difference is in the protein, they do eat meat, just probably not quite as much meat, but they do eat meat, but it's all locally sourced. None of it is processed in these areas. Typically, these people that have lived longer, it's processed food, locally sourced. And that's another area that my grandfather, growing up on the farm, they had all their own fruits and vegetables, and the meat wasn't from a processing plant. They raised the cattle and the chickens, and then they would have 1 cow a year for themselves at a local butcher shop, a guy they know, do the butchering and processing, and then they they lived off that meat, and a lot of times they didn't even need, because they shared it, they didn't even need to put it in the freezer. They just, they just had enough cows and then they'd split them up between their family, my family. So it is locally sourced, fresh. Those things make a difference. And I know that's hard in our society today, but even later in life, he managed to do that. And even if you buy fresh from a grocery store, it's and buy the fresher meat rather than any processed meats. I think that's the point. The diet is a big part of it, obviously.
Diet is a big part of it, but and I did notice in the show that they talked about the financials behind it, because but a lot of beans were across the board.
Yes.
Legumes, and it's like a lot of time it's
all these places mention legumes and nuts too.
Right. And so those aren't expensive, and a lot of time was spent preparing this food naturally, right? So
and they took their time eating it, and a peaceful eating environment was another point.
And so I'm not going to get into too much on the food, because that's obviously a big thing, but financial wise, is it better to spend a little extra to get that organic or farm or local? I would argue it is, because but it's hard to do, especially when you're raising a family or you have a big, it's
in America, in the big cities today, it's really hard, but it can be done.
I'm going to guess your grandfather wasn't drinking soda, Mountain Dew all day, and
he never drank any pop. And I rarely saw, and the only snack, he didn't eat any, like when the chips were on the table, I noticed one time and even asked him, I'm like, I never see you eating chips or snack foods. And he goes, oh, you know me, I love popcorn at night. And they would make it, the seed popcorn shake it in the oil and pop it.
Go out and pick me an ear. We need some popcorn.
I don't know if I ever saw my grandma or grandpa use a microwave, except maybe to reheat a cup of coffee. And he drank a lot of coffee though, but yeah.
So we got his beans. Okay.
Yeah.
Number 6, wine at 5. So just like, saying that, you don't see him drinking soda. Was he a big alcohol drinker, your grandfather?
And no, in fact, he swore to the day he died, he never touched a drop of alcohol in his life. So that's where he does differ. He didn't drink red wine, didn't get the antioxidants there, but they always had grapes on the table, and he'd be snacking on fruit and grapes. So he got the grapes, but he did not drink alcohol. My mom and dad, same. All 3 of them swore they never touched a drop of alcohol or smoked in their lives. So that's interesting.
Well, not smoking is probably quite helpful. They didn't mention any tobacco use on the show.
Yeah.
But they did make a point to say a lot of them are drinking wine, and it's okay, 2 glasses a day. But what I pointed out in here, and what I found very interesting, is that it's done socially, in a social setting, not to excess, the 80-20 rule,
not sitting by yourself drinking a box of wine.
Right.
In the afternoon.
Social gathering. And locally produced and organic. They make their own wine or whatever.
Yeah. And I saw a lot of that in the doctors' reviews I read from health experts and doctors saying, a glass of red wine a day is actually really good for you. But that's where my grandfather parted from these rules. Yeah.
And so, do you drink wine or not? That's not the point. The point is, are you being moderation about it, and also social, which are the next 3. The number 7 is belong. And they said the research shows attending faith-based services 4 times per month added 4 to 14 years of life expectancy. And in Loma Linda, is that what it's called?
Loma Linda.
They focused on the Seventh-day Adventists, which are big in that town, apparently.
They are.
And so everyone was going to church. All of them. Now, the denomination didn't matter, and you could probably argue it doesn't really necessarily need to be religious, as long as it's a community of positive thinking, that you're together. And I think having that is helpful. And I think when it comes to financial planning, I say, you got to have activities.
Yeah.
You got to have a social group, and church is an easy one for a lot of people because there's a common denominator. There's a schedule.
Staying connected was a big theme that I've read about this in these people.
It's a community
for longevity. Social connectivity is crucial to longevity. If you want to be healthier longer, which is the goal isn't necessarily to live longer, because you could live to 110, but if the last 20 of it are spent in memory care or long-term care, the goal is to stay active and mentally active. And by staying connected, what you're saying is huge. Yeah. And my grandfather was super social. Like, people were always just stopping by, the neighbors, to hear his stories or for him to tell stories. Or he was good. He was on the church board. He was always doing stuff. Yeah,
he was. Okay, so he did attend some regularly. Yeah.
Yep, he did. Man, not 4 times. He probably didn't do it 4 times a month, especially the last, I'm going to say, 10 or 20 years of his life. But he did attend and was still on the board. He would go to board meetings, and he would go to 1 or 2 services if he wasn't traveling. But he did a lot of traveling too.
So when you're looking at, retirement, just because you're leaving your employees at work, don't forget to find a place to belong. And especially if it means to get out of your house and go somewhere on a regular cadence, that's the point of it. And all the centenarians did that in the show. Number 8, loved ones first. One of the big points they made in the show was there were no long-term care facilities in these places. There are no big hospitals with all the elderly. The elderly stayed in the extended family. They provided some sort of value. There was no loneliness. It was family-oriented first. And they did a follow-up on Singapore, which is a city-state. And Singapore, I found this rather interesting financially. They provide the government. I mean, and it's a city, so it's not like we could do this across the U.S., but maybe, why not? They provided a subsidy to the people of their country if their parents moved within proximity of them.
There actually are. That's actually a bill. That's actually a bill that's been proposed nationally here by a senator. I just read about it, and some states are proposing that instead of Medicaid kicking in, what they would do is take that money, and they're talking about a bill that would also have money kind of through like the Medicaid, where it's the state and federal government working together basically through the state social services, and that is give money to the families to take care of or provide money if you take in a loved one in elder care in your home. So
easier said than done for a lot of people, working families, sandwich generation. Drop my parents into my home right now. My mom's passed, but my dad is independent. But if he needed to, would it be better for him to come to live with me than in a nursing home? Better for him.
Better you than Ed, your brother. I mean, obviously.
Right. Of all the brothers, there's 4 of us. I'm probably the one closest proximity, but also
and the most responsible.
But I got 3 kids at home,
I'm teasing.
Yeah, right. But it's better for my dad to come live with me if he wanted to. Is it better for my family? So the argument is yes. The kids see that there's respect for the elders, and there's learning to be had there. Keeps people humble, keeps people connected, and then shows my kids the way. And when the way is when I'm older and I need help, they'll be there for me.
Yeah. Works for you and your kids. I think it is a positive for you and your kids, but it really comes down to the boss and how it would affect her, the wife. Right. You're not doing anything without the boss's approval on that one.
This is true, which leads us to the last one, which is right tribe. So loved ones first, obviously, spending money let me just quickly go back to that. Spending money on a long-term care facility versus keeping the money in the family and using the family. Again, everyone's circumstance is different, but something to consider.
Yeah.
something to consider. I often say to people, they're like, oh, I should buy a long-term care policy. I'm like, buy a life insurance policy and then spend your money, and then your kids can get the life insurance policy and have your kids pay for the life insurance policy because it's helping them, right?
Yep.
As opposed to, but last but not least is right tribe. So they said that positive social networks led to positive health outcomes. We did a show on the Harvard study on happiness and how the number one factor wasn't how much money you had. It was, they took the people from the streets of Boston, then they took the elite of Boston from Harvard, where they went from, and they studied who did better, who lived longer, and who's happier. And the happier people were the ones with the family, with the social connections, not the money.
Yeah.
And so watch that video if you haven't. But this goes to the idea of, where do you spend your money? I did a show. If I had $10,000 extra, what would I spend it on? I'd spend it on a social network, improving my social network, not investing in the market, buying Apple stock, which, if I should have bought Microsoft in 2022 or whatever, no, it's about your tribe, your local. So focusing on that when you retire, think of the Golden Girls, like that show, the Golden Girls, like that might be the future. If you think about it, they form these tight-knit groups so that no one's lonely, everyone belongs. It could be through your church, it could be through your family, but it's something there to help socially.
That's what my grandfather has done with the elderly neighbors, because I see that happening in his area where I grew up on that farm, and the farm where he's at. There are a lot of farms, and there are a lot of widowers and widows. And so all the old guys, a lot of them single now, get together. Some of them not. Sometimes their wives come if they're still married. They get together every single morning, Monday through Friday, at the local coffee shop and sit and talk for an hour and a half. And then they go out and they stay connected. And a lot of them, and I mean, it's a lot. There's two groups, one at two different places. My dad does like every other one, and a bunch of them do it, but they all know each other and kind of rotate. And my dad's in it now. He's 80. And so, and it's not like an official club. This just kind of happened. And my grandfather, it was so close and tight knit and respected by neighbors that, his second two wives, that's how it happened. And finally, this last one, Etta, she outlived him and was very sad, but he and her husband were like very good friends. They were a mile down the road. And so it just worked out. And so if you can have a social network and utilize that to stay happy, that's a huge key to longevity right there.
And I think this is the one spot that people are lacking the most in the United States is people focus on food. They know it, it's tough.
Sure.
But I think there's not enough focus on spending money to maintain a social network, because it does take time and money. It doesn't have to take a lot of money is what I'm saying. But,
no.
If you invest into something, you're going to get a better bang for your buck on your social network or your family than on a new car or investing in the market.
Yeah.
So little tidbit before we go, Tony, the author of this study and on the show, he said, can I recreate a blue zone? Can I create a blue zone from scratch in the United States? And they did. They tried. And the first place they went to was a city called Albert Lea in southern Minnesota.
Yeah.
Yes. And so interesting. Now you're going to want to watch it because that's close to home.
It is very close to home. Yeah. In fact, it's between here and my where I grew up, where my grandfather was. So stick with me, Tony. I take you places. You're gonna broaden your world. That is one thing I hadn't heard. I had read all about this Netflix documentary Blue Zone or Living to 100, and I didn't know that was a factor. Albert Lea was mentioned. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. And now you're going to be forced to watch, if only for that.
Oh, I'm going to watch it for sure, especially after reading about it for the last couple of days.
So, conclusion, if you want to live well into your 90s, again, do you want to? Do you want to live that long? All right. If you do, are your financial plans going to, first, will your money last? That's the big fear mongering, but that's not the key. The key is, take your finances and don't worry so much if they're going to last. Worry if they're going to go to this Power 9. Worry if your resources are going to go toward the Power 9. If they're not, why are you spending it on that? Why are you putting money into something that's not going to help your longevity? If your goal is to live a long and happy, healthy life, that's the goal. So watch the show. If you haven't seen it, Live to 100 Blue Zones, Secrets of the Blue Zones. I found it interesting on Netflix, but hopefully you gained a few things from here. Again, Tony, I think you should watch it only because of the Minnesota references, but
I will.
Thanks for a good show. And I guess actually, let me bring on my kids in honor of Family First so that they, remind us that I do this as a financial planner, but I also find it interesting. So the people, and last comment here, people that are commenting on our videos that say, you guys chatter too much, or there's too much, chit chat, get to the point. If we had to get straight to the point, that wouldn't be the right people, the right tribe. I would have stopped the show years ago. But Tony, thanks for being part of my tribe and one of my Power 9. See you all next week.
All matters discussed in today's show are for informational purposes only.
This show is not investment advice.
Dan Riddle nor Dolphin Financial Group are affiliated or endorsed by any government agency.
Investment advisory services are offered through Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc., a registered investment advisor in the state of Florida.
Insurance products and services are offered through Dolphin Insurance, Inc.
Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc. and Dolphin Insurance, Inc. are affiliated companies doing businesses as Dolphin Financial Group.
You should talk to someone at Dolphin Financial Group before implementing any of these strategies or ideas.